Alright, so it's the middle of summer, and that means we're at the height of barbecue season. And if there's one type of food Koreans are famous for, it's barbecue. Now, while there are tons of different Korean barbecue out there, for me, the one that stands out above the rest is bossam. The literal translation of bossam is vegetable wrapped pork. So think of a Korean taco using lettuce, or like a Thai lettuce wrap, but with a lot more attitude. This dish is insanely good and has become a weekly staple in my own home. And as far as barbecue goes, this is pretty far on the healthy side, so it's more of a guilt-free indulgence. There's no right or wrong way to do bossam, but today I'm going to show you how I do mine. You'll definitely want some good quality kimchi and perfectly cooked rice for this. Not only are these ingredients traditional, but that's also a shameless plug for my kimchi and rice videos, which you can check out here. You can absolutely do this in an oven and get great results, but for the best possible experience, I'd recommend doing it on a barbecue, and that'll be the way I show you today. If you're interested in learning how to make exciting, modern, and Korean food, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of the episodes I release every weekend. As always, exact measurements will be in the description, and with all that being said, let's make some bossam. We're going to be using a 1.5 kilogram pork shoulder for today. You can really use any cut of pork for this, but pork shoulder is not only more traditional, I prefer it over, say, pork belly. I've done this with both a skin-on and bone-in shoulder, as well as a boneless one, and aside from the bone-in looking nicer for presentation, I don't really notice much of a difference in quality or flavor, so whichever you choose will be fine. If you're a regular viewer of my channel, you'll know that I'm a strong advocate for salting and curing most foods to maximize their flavor and texture, and this will be no different. So let's start by making a rub. In a small bowl, combine 1 cup of brown sugar, 1 tablespoon of freshly cracked black pepper, and 1/4 cup of kosher salt. Don't worry about being too exact with the measurements or about how much salt and sugar is in this, because you'll need enough to thoroughly coat the shoulder, and the finished product won't be overly sweet or salty. Give it a good mix, and we're ready for the next step. Slap some gloves on and begin to work the rub all over the shoulder. Seriously, don't rush this part. Take your time and ensure that every nook and cranny has a good amount of rub on it. This is going to ensure the pork stays nice and juicy. It's also going to help to tenderize and season it. As you work the rub in, the salt and sugar will begin to melt and form kind of like a glaze. That'll help you coat it more evenly. Once you've used up all of the rub, go ahead and place the shoulder in a bowl wrapped snugly with plastic wrap. Then stick it in the fridge for at the very least 2 to 4 hours, but ideally overnight. You'll definitely want to plan this ahead of time. Now, before we get into the next step, I want to talk about 2 ingredients that are used not only in this, but in 90% of Korean cuisine: Gochujang and Doenjang. Gochujang is a fermented hot pepper paste made using gochugaru or Korean chili flakes. And dongjiang is a fermented soybean paste, similar to Japanese miso, but much saltier and funkier. Gochujang is pretty easy to find nowadays, but if you're unable to find dongjiang, you can just use white miso. Next, we're going to make Ssamjang, which is a type of barbecue sauce used in bossam. Start by taking 2 scallions and slicing them down the middle, then slice them as thinly as you can. We're also going to need 4 large garlic cloves minced. Try to use fresh garlic for this if you can, as the intense pungent flavor complements the overall heat of the sauce. Walnuts would be commonly used in Ssamjang for some nuttiness and crunch, but I actually really like pumpkin seeds instead. They're also a better alternative if you're making this for someone with a nut allergy. A mortar and pestle works great for this, as you just want to break the seeds into small pieces without turning it into butter, but you could also just put them in a plastic bag and smash them with the back of a knife or a mallet. In a medium-sized bowl, add 5 heaping tablespoons of dongjiang and 3.5 heaping tablespoons of gochujang. You can adjust this depending on how spicy or mild you prefer. The sliced scallions, minced garlic, and crushed pumpkin seeds. To that, we'll add 1 tablespoon of sesame oil, 1/3 of a cup of rice syrup or 1/4 cup of corn syrup, 1 teaspoon of sugar, and 2 tablespoons of toasted sesame seeds. Give it a good mix until everything is incorporated. This sauce will last for weeks in a sealed container in the fridge and also makes a great dip for veggies. Once the shoulder is finished brining, it's time to light the barbecue. Since I use a Weber kettle grill, I'll be showing you instructions for this particular grill. You can use a propane barbecue, just make sure to only light one side so that you're cooking indirectly. I'm also using briquettes as opposed to lump wood charcoal, as I want a lower temperature over a longer period of time. Low and slow. To do this, we're going to make what's called a snake, and that's simply making a line around the rim of the grill stacked 2 by 2. This will allow the charcoal to burn slowly, only a little bit at a time, kind of like a cartoon fuse for dynamite. When lighting the chimney starter, I'm only going to fill it about halfway. We don't want the initial temperature to be too hot, but we need it hot enough to slowly ignite the snake and maintain a low temperature while it does that. On a side note, get yourself a torch. They're beyond useful for lighting chimney starters as well as a myriad of other kitchen uses. And let's face it, you look pretty badass melting cheese with a blowtorch. While we're waiting for the coals to heat up, take a small metal pan and soak about a cup of wood chips. This will let them burn nice and slowly. As far as what kind, it's just a matter of preference. I'm using mesquite, but applewood is also nice. Once your coals are glowing and have a layer of white ash on them, you're ready to go. Carefully dump the lit coals at one end of the snake, just slightly overlapping on top. Then take the soaked wood chips and distribute them among the snake, placing the majority of them on the already hot coals to start the initial smoking process. Place the water-filled pan at the opposite side of the hot coals. This is going to create some humidity inside the barbecue while we smoke the pork shoulder. You'll want to take the shoulder out of the fridge about an hour before you smoke it. You can see how much water has been pulled out of the shoulder, and the outer layer is now the consistency of raw bacon. Don't rinse any of the liquid off either. In fact, you want to work the pork shoulder into the liquid to make sure everything is coated. This is what's going to turn into a crust later on. Go ahead and place the pork shoulder on the grill opposite to the hot coals. We want to cook this using indirect heat. We're also going to be cooking this in a few different stages. For the first stage, we're going to be smoking the shoulder for about 3 to 4 hours. Place the lid on the grill and adjust the vents so that you're maintaining a constant temperature of around 300 degrees Fahrenheit. You might have to baby it for the first 20 minutes or so, but after that the temperature should remain constant. We'll come back and check on it after the first hour. An hour into the smoking process, and you can already start to see how the sugars are starting to form a crust and the pork shoulder has taken on a darker color from the smoke. Using a good pair of metal tongs, another tool every kitchen should have, just saying, turn the pork shoulder around to help it cook more evenly. That being said, try to have the thicker part of the shoulder facing the heat more time than away. This goes for any protein in general. Place the lid back on and continue to smoke. We'll check on it in about another hour or two. 3.5 hours in, and you can see, and smell, how smoky the pork shoulder has become. There's also a nice crust that's formed all over. Now that we've gotten a good amount of smoke into the pork shoulder, it's time to move on to the next step. For the second stage of cooking, we're going to take heavy-duty aluminum foil and wrap the pork shoulder twice. This will allow the pork shoulder to essentially braise in its own juices and get it to the point where the meat is firm but still falling apart. Place the now wrapped pork shoulder back onto the grill away from the heat. Cover with the lid and we'll let this go for about an hour or two, depending on the thickness of your shoulder. Take the shoulder off the grill and unwrap the aluminum foil. There will be a lot of very hot steam coming off of it, so be careful and don't put your face near it. You'll know the pork shoulder is done when you can easily break pieces off. For the third and final stage of cooking, we're going to get some char on the outside and form the classic bark. Place a small amount of coals about a quarter of the way up in your chimney starter and get them ripping hot. Then place them in the center of the grill. Place a small handful of dry wood chips directly onto the coals so that they ignite and burn. This will give the shoulder a more natural wood flame char. So essentially for this last step, we're just giving the pork shoulder some color and caramelizing the sugars on the outside. So you only want to keep each side on direct flames for about 30 seconds or so. You want it dark but not burnt. Once you have the desired amount of char and you can see the sugars bubbling, the shoulder is done. Go ahead and take it off the grill and allow it to cool until you can safely handle the meat. You can see just how tender the shoulder has gotten, that it easily breaks apart with minimal pressure from a pair of tongs. You'll also notice we've gotten that nice red smoke ring around the rim of the shoulder. Now that the pork shoulder is finished and cooling, we can move on to the rest of the bossam component. Again, there is no right or wrong way to do this. This is just how I like mine. Julienne half of an English cucumber so that it's about 3 centimeters long. The cucumber will give the bossam some crunch and a fresh, clean flavor to complement the smoky, fatty pork shoulder. Kimchi is an essential component of bossam, and you can check out the link here to learn how to make your own at home. We're placing everything in separate bowls because bossam is meant to be assembled as you eat it. You'll also need some rice. I'm using a short grain rice for this because it's a lot stickier than a long grain, and again, you can check out the link here to learn how to make perfect rice at home. For this last component, you'll want lettuce that's big enough to wrap everything in. I'm using a combination of butter lettuce and romaine, but you could use leaf, Boston, iceberg, or even perilla leaves. By now, the pork shoulder should be cool enough to handle and break apart. You can shred this up completely like a classic pulled pork, but I prefer the texture when it's still a little chunky. And that's it, Korean bossam. All that's left to do now is set everything out, invite some good friends over for some cold beers, and enjoy one of the best barbecues you'll ever eat. Thanks for watching. If you want to learn more modern Korean dishes like this, hit that subscribe button. I release new episodes every week. You can also check me out on Facebook and Instagram for more content.